You're listening to the top cheating audio stories. Enjoy your listening experience. I never thought I'd be posting my story on Reddit, but here I am, still trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened over the last few weeks. Honestly, I'm still in shock, and I don't even know where to begin. Maybe if I get this out, I can finally start to make sense of it. My name's Mark. I'm 36, and I've been a delivery driver for one of those big national courier companies for the past 8 years. It's a decent gig, steady, long hours, but I've always liked the routine of it. You get into a rhythm, driving around the city, listening to whatever's on the radio. I like the predictability, I guess. Maybe that's why I'm still in disbelief about what's happened. I thought my life, my marriage, was steady too. I've been married to Alyssa for almost 10 years now. We met back in 2011 when she was just getting into real estate. She was ambitious from the start, and I admired that about her. Over the years, she's built a name for herself in Toledo, flipping homes, helping families find their dream houses, and lately, she's been talking about moving into the home staging business, setting up properties to look just right for showings. It's become her world, and I guess somewhere along the line, I started feeling like I was just a part of the furniture. We don't have kids. I'm not sure if that was by choice or if we just drifted past that part of our lives without really noticing. We've always been good together. No major fights, no big drama. But lately, things have felt distant. I'm not a guy who overthinks things. I let life happen, for better or worse. But when Alyssa started pulling away, working late, staying out after her showings, I began to notice the cracks. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, she's a busy woman. Real estate is a competitive game. Late dinners with clients or contractors aren't unusual. I didn't want to be the jealous husband who starts questioning every little thing. But then, 2 weeks ago, I found a receipt in her car. A fancy restaurant, the Urban Grill, a place way out of our price range, and not the kind of spot Alyssa ever mentioned. She'd always tell me about her client dinners at mid-range spots. But this bill? It was for 2 people, wine, appetizers, dessert, the whole 9 yards. There was a charge on a credit card I'd never seen before. I almost let it go. Almost. But I couldn't get it out of my head. Something about it just didn't sit right. I figured maybe she didn't want to bother me with it, or maybe it was a work expense she forgot to mention. But as the days went by, I started noticing more little things. Late-night texts that made her smile, but she'd quickly hide her phone. Random meetings with contractors at odd hours, and the way she'd slip away from the dinner table to take calls outside. Last Tuesday night, she thought I was asleep, but I'd gotten up to grab some water from the kitchen. That's when I heard it, her voice, hushed, talking to someone named Drew. I only caught fragments, something about timing and just waiting for the right moment. The words cut through me, sharper than I could have imagined. I stood there in the dark, leaning against the counter, trying to piece it together. Was it business? Was it something more? That's when the doubt really started to set in. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't even know how to. Instead, I kept my mouth shut and went into investigator mode, quietly. I didn't want to blow up our life on a suspicion. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I went out and bought a small hidden camera. Nothing fancy, just something I could tuck into the bookshelf in her home office. Alyssa had turned that room into her workspace over the last year, and she was always in there making calls, typing away, and hosting Zoom meetings with clients. At least, that's what she said she was doing. I figured if something was going on, it would show up there. I felt sick to my stomach setting it up, but I had to know. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. I just didn't trust the situation. Something felt off, and I needed proof one way or another. The first few days, I got nothing. Just normal conversations, her talking about listings, pricing, the usual real estate jargon that I didn't really understand. It almost made me feel guilty, like I was invading her privacy for no reason. But then on Friday night, when she thought I was working late, I got a hit. She was in the office, and she wasn't alone. The camera caught her talking to Drew on a video call. I saw them laugh together, and then she leaned in toward the screen in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate for a work call. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone in her voice? It was the kind of playful, flirty tone she used to have with me years ago, back when things were good. That was when I knew. Drew wasn't just a business associate. He was something more, and she was hiding it from me. I watched in silence as they wrapped up their call, and Alyssa didn't seem guilty at all. She looked happy. I felt this coldness settle over me, like everything I thought I knew about our life together was slipping through my fingers. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I reached out to an old friend, Eric. He'd been through a nasty divorce a couple of years ago, after catching his wife cheating on him. We weren't that close anymore, but he was the only person I could think of who might know what I was going through. I needed advice. How to handle this without blowing everything up. I wasn't ready to make a scene, not yet. Eric didn't sugarcoat things. When I told him what I'd found, he sighed like a guy who'd been through it all before. "Mark, you've got to be careful, man," he said. "If you confront her without hard evidence, she'll just spin it on you. Trust me. Get your proof first. And don't do anything stupid." He was right, of course. As much as I wanted to just lay it all out there, accuse her, demand answers, I knew I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The next day, Alyssa was acting like nothing had changed. She kissed me goodbye, said she was meeting a client for lunch, and told me she'd be home late. I tried to smile, play it off like everything was normal, but inside, I felt like I was being torn apart. I had to know where she was really going. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a GPS tracker in her car. I told myself it wasn't to catch her in the act, just to verify where she was going. But deep down, I knew I was looking for something more. Something that would either confirm my worst fears or, hopefully, put them to rest. That evening, I watched her location on my phone. She didn't go to any restaurant or meet with a client. She drove across town to a quiet, upscale apartment complex on the west side of Cleveland. I parked a block away and watched as she entered the building. She didn't come back out for 3 hours. By the time she finally returned home that night, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. But my mind was racing. Who was Drew? What the hell was she doing at that apartment for so long? Why wasn't she hiding it better? Or did she think I was just too clueless to notice? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I was done playing the fool. The next day, I made the decision to go a step further. If Alyssa wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. That's when I decided to follow her inside that apartment the next time she went there. I waited for Alyssa's next move with a quiet, simmering tension. There was no way I was going to sit back and let things unfold without knowing exactly what was going on. Every evening, I watched her routine more carefully, noting the subtle changes in her behavior. She was getting comfortable, almost careless, believing that I was none the wiser. But I had the GPS tracker on her car, and it wouldn't be long before I followed her again. 2 days later, it happened. Alyssa told me she had another late-night real estate event. She kissed me on the cheek and slipped out the door, dressed in a sleek black dress that I hadn't seen her wear in months. It was one of those dresses that made heads turn, a far cry from the professional business attire she usually wore for her showings. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and phone. The tracker pinged her location. She wasn't heading toward any real estate venue I knew of. No client dinner, no open house. Instead, she was heading straight back to that high-end condominium in Cleveland. Same place. I followed her from a distance, careful not to get too close. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I'd say if she saw me. But deep down, I knew there wasn't going to be a confrontation tonight. I wasn't ready for that. I needed more proof, something concrete. I had to be absolutely sure before I blew everything up. When I arrived at the complex, I parked a block away again, far enough to stay unnoticed. I watched as she pulled into the underground garage, her taillights disappearing around a corner. The building was sleek, modern, nothing like the kind of places Alyssa and I could afford. It was the kind of place where someone like Drew would live. I waited, watching for her to come back out, but like before, she didn't. Hours passed. The night got colder, but I stayed, my mind running through all the possible scenarios. Was she really with Drew? Or was there something else happening in that building? I couldn't sit there forever. I had to know what was going on inside. So, I made a decision, one that could either give me the answers I was looking for or unravel everything. I walked toward the entrance, acting like I belonged there, and pulled the hood of my jacket up to cover my face. The place had a keycard system, so I waited by the door, pretending to be on my phone until someone came by to let me in. It didn't take long before a young woman in workout gear walked up, swiped her card, and held the door open for me without a second thought. I was in. The lobby was pristine, with expensive art on the walls and the faint smell of lemon polish in the air. I felt like an intruder, out of place, but I kept moving. I found the elevator and took it to the 4th floor, the level Alyssa's car was parked near the last time. My heart pounded as I stepped out and started down the hallway, listening for any sound behind the doors. And then, there was Alyssa's voice. I froze for a second, ears straining to catch the conversation behind a partially open door. I heard her laugh, that same playful, intimate tone she'd used on the video call with Drew. But it wasn't just Drew's voice in there. There was someone else, a woman, speaking in low, measured tones. I inched closer to the door, careful not to let it creak. My mind was racing. Who the hell was she talking to? Another client? Someone else in on whatever this was? I peeked through the crack and caught sight of Alyssa sitting on a couch with Drew beside her, and across from them was a woman I'd never seen before, tall, sharp features, dressed in a tailored navy suit that screamed money. She didn't look like a real estate client. She looked like someone with authority, someone who was used to being in control. I strained to hear their conversation, catching snippets. Should be finalized in a few days, the woman said. We'll move the funds, and then you can transfer the properties. Alyssa nodded. We've been careful so far. No one's questioned anything. Good, the woman said, her voice smooth and calm. Keep it that way. This deal has to stay clean on the surface. Drew leaned back, smirking. We're not amateurs, Vanessa. Everything's going according to plan. Vanessa. I locked the name away in my mind. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much bigger. I watched as they exchanged more words about transfers, deals, and funds. It became clear that they weren't just meeting for personal reasons. They were involved in something shady, something that went way beyond real estate. I was in over my head. I pulled back before they could see me. My mind was spinning. What the hell was Alyssa involved in? It wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker. Money laundering? Fraud? I didn't know the full extent, but I knew it was serious. I slipped back down the hallway, my heart racing. I couldn't confront her yet. Not now. I needed to figure out what they were doing, what exactly Alyssa had gotten herself into, and how deep this thing went. There were too many moving parts to just blow it up without knowing what I was dealing with. I got out of the building the same way I came in, slipping past the security cameras and out into the cold night air. As I drove home, I replayed everything I'd heard in my head. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted wasn't one I wanted to see. When I got home, Alyssa was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in hand, acting like nothing had happened. She looked up at me, smiling like it was just another normal night. But I couldn't shake the image of her in that condo, sitting with Drew and Vanessa, talking about funds and transfers like they were planning the next big heist. How was the event? I asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged. Same old thing. Clients trying to outbid each other. I think I'm close to closing on a couple of properties, though. I nodded, biting my tongue. I wanted to call her out on her lie, throw the entire conversation I'd overheard in her face, but I held back. I had to play it smart. Instead, I texted Eric the next morning, asking him if we could meet up for a drink. I needed advice. Someone who wasn't emotionally involved in all this. Someone who could help me make sense of what I'd found. We met at a small bar downtown. Eric listened as I laid everything out for him. The GPS tracker, the video calls, the late-night meetings with Drew, and now the involvement of this mysterious Vanessa. By the time I was done, Eric just shook his head. Man, this is a mess, he said, swirling his drink. I figured something shady was going on with her. But this? It sounds like she's wrapped up in something way bigger than an affair. You think it's criminal? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it from someone else. Eric nodded slowly. It's not just about cheating anymore, Mark. This sounds like fraud, maybe even money laundering. If she's moving funds like that with this Drew guy, she could be in serious trouble. So what the hell do I do? I asked, leaning forward. Do I confront her? Do I call the cops? Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. If you confront her, she's just going to deny it. Worse, she might try to pin this all on you somehow, especially if this Vanessa is as powerful as she sounds. I think you need more evidence before you do anything. I sat back, staring at the condensation on my beer glass. Eric was right. I couldn't just storm into this without a plan. I needed more than just a few overheard conversations and a gut feeling. I needed hard proof, something I could use to either save Alyssa or protect myself when it all came crashing down. I wasn't sure when I'd finally hit the limit, but it came faster than I expected. The lies were piling up. I'd followed Alyssa, caught her in shady meetings, and overheard enough to know that whatever she was into, it wasn't just business. Every night, I found myself obsessing over the details, replaying the conversations in my head, the smirk on Drew's face, the way Vanessa spoke in calm, calculated tones. There was a dark edge to everything, and it was only getting sharper. I couldn't sit back any longer. I had to confront Alyssa, but I knew I couldn't just come out and accuse her. That would backfire. She'd deny it, twist the story, and I'd be left with nothing but my suspicions. So I decided to go in with a plan, pretend I knew more than I actually did, bluff my way through. The night I chose to confront her, she was late again. She told me earlier in the day that she was going to meet a client, the same story she'd been feeding me for weeks. By this point, I knew better. I didn't bother tracking her that night. I was done sneaking around. I was going to handle this head on. When she finally walked through the door, it was past 10. She was dressed up, heels, lipstick, the works. And when she saw me sitting on the couch, her smile flickered for just a second. It was quick, but I caught it. The unease. She knew something was off. "Hey," she said, hanging her coat on the rack by the door. "Long day?" "You could say that," I replied, keeping my tone calm. I didn't want to tip her off too soon. She grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and sat down across from me, crossing her legs and taking a long sip. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us growing thicker. "How was the meeting?" I asked casually. She shrugged, her eyes darting toward the TV, as if looking for an escape. "It was fine. Just a long day, you know. Clients can be a pain sometimes." I nodded. "Yeah, I can imagine. So, what's going on with that deal you're working on with Drew?" Her hand froze for a split second, just before setting the glass down on the coffee table. She didn't look at me. "Drew? What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You know what I'm talking about, Alyssa. You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the secret meetings, the way you act around him." I paused, watching her reaction. "I've heard enough to know something's going on between the two of you. So why don't you just come out and say it?" She blinked, her mouth tightening. "Mark, you're being paranoid. Drew's just a business partner. That's it. We've been working on a big real estate project together, and yes, it takes time, but there's nothing going on between us. I don't know where you're getting these crazy ideas." "Crazy ideas?" I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "I'm not blind, Alyssa. I've seen you with him. I've heard you on the phone. Don't insult my intelligence." Her face flushed with anger. "So now you're spying on me? Listening to my phone calls? Following me around like some stalker? Jesus, Mark, do you even hear yourself? This is insane." I stood up, the frustration boiling over. "Insane? What's insane is you sneaking around behind my back with that guy, lying to me every time you walk out that door. I've seen the way you look at him, Alyssa. You think I don't know?" She stood up too, her eyes blazing. "Know what? That I'm trying to make something of myself? That I'm building something bigger than what we have here? I've been busting my ass for this deal, and all you can think about is some ridiculous affair that doesn't exist." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "I'm not talking about real estate, Alyssa. I'm talking about Vanessa Clarkson. I know she's involved in this deal with Drew. I've looked into her. Do you have any idea who you're working with?" Her eyes widened, just for a moment, before she caught herself. But it was enough. She knew exactly who Vanessa was. "That's none of your business," she said, her voice strained. "This is my work, Mark. You don't get to come in here and make accusations when you don't even know half the story. So tell me the story, then." I snapped. "Tell me why you're meeting with a lawyer who defends organized crime figures. Tell me what you're really involved in, Alyssa, because I'm pretty sure it's not just selling houses." She stared at me, her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But then she shook her head and crossed her arms, retreating behind a wall of silence. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold. "This is business. Nothing more." I scoffed. "Business? Right. That's why you're spending all your time in Cleveland, in those fancy condos, moving money with Drew and Vanessa. I've heard the conversations. Alyssa, don't stand there and tell me this is normal business. She glared at me, her face hardening. You've been spying on me? I didn't answer, but she already knew. Her expression changed, a flicker of fear flashing across her face, quickly replaced by defiance. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Mark, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. You think you know, but you don't. This isn't just about us. I stepped back, letting her words sink in. There was the crack, the moment I'd been waiting for. She wasn't denying it anymore. She was warning me. What are you talking about? I asked, my tone cautious now. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed her coat and started walking toward the door. Where are you going? I called after her. She turned around, her eyes cold. I need some air. Don't wait up. And with that, she was gone. I stood there, staring at the door as it clicked shut, my mind racing. What the hell had she meant by that? This wasn't just about us? What was she involved in? I didn't wait long to find out. The next morning, after she left for another meeting, I started digging into Vanessa Clarkson. I needed to know exactly who Alyssa was working with, what kind of danger she'd dragged us into. I'd heard the name during that meeting at the condo, but now I needed the full story. It didn't take long to find out. Vanessa wasn't just any lawyer. She was known in certain circles, defending high-profile criminals, specifically those tied to organized crime. Money laundering, racketeering, fraud. She'd represented them all. And now, she was tied to my wife. I sat there, staring at the computer screen, my stomach twisting into knots. This was bigger than I'd thought. A lot bigger. Alyssa wasn't just hiding an affair. She was involved in something dangerous, something that could get both of us hurt. Or worse. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run straight to the cops, tell them everything I knew, everything I'd overheard. But another part of me knew that wouldn't end well. Alyssa had connections now, powerful ones. If I exposed her, I wasn't just risking her life, I was risking mine too. I grabbed my phone and called Eric. You need to get out, Eric said the moment I told him what I'd found. This is way above your head, man. If Vanessa Clarkson is involved, that means big money, dangerous people. I can't just walk away, I said, pacing the kitchen. This is my wife, Eric. She's tangled up in this. And if I don't figure it out, I'm just as screwed as she is. Eric was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. Look, I've seen people go down because of stuff like this. If she's in with organized crime, there's no clean way out. But you can't be reckless. Get more evidence. And whatever you do, don't let her know you're on to them. I thanked him and hung up, my mind spinning. Eric was right. I couldn't just barge in and confront her again. Not without solid proof. And I couldn't go to the cops until I had more. But the clock was ticking. I didn't know how much longer I could keep playing the clueless husband while Alyssa sank deeper into this mess. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how far gone Alyssa was. She wasn't just tangled up in something dirty. She was an active player. Every clue I uncovered, every piece of information I pulled together painted a picture of someone I didn't even recognize anymore. This was beyond anything I had imagined. It didn't take long before I found out about the cabin. I'd been keeping tabs on Alyssa, tracking her movements whenever she left the house. At first, it was just small things, more late-night meetings, longer drives to Cleveland, the same shady people cropping up in her life. But then she made a mistake. She got careless. One evening, I saw a text pop up on her phone as she set it down to charge. Lakeside, tomorrow at 8. Be there. The message came from Drew, of course. She'd been meeting him off the grid for weeks now, and I'd learned to watch for these little clues. She thought she had me fooled, but I'd been watching her closer than she realized. The next night, I followed her, keeping a safe distance, my headlights off as I trailed behind her car through the dark back roads. I'd already scoped out the address the night before. It was a remote cabin by Lake Erie, about an hour outside of Toledo, deep in the woods, far away from any prying eyes. The perfect place to hide whatever the hell they were doing. When she pulled into the gravel driveway, I parked a little way back, leaving my car behind the trees. The cabin was dark except for a few lights coming from the front porch, but I could see movement inside through the windows, silhouettes of people walking back and forth. I crouched down behind some bushes, trying to get a better look. Alyssa stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the gravel as she walked up the steps and through the door. The second she was inside, I moved closer, keeping low. I could hear voices now, muffled but clear enough to catch pieces of their conversation. "You're sure this is the last payout?" That was Alyssa's voice, tight with tension. Drew answered, his tone casual but smug. "Relax. Everything's set. Once the transfer goes through, we're golden. Vanessa's already handling the rest." I crept closer, keeping to the shadows as I made my way around the side of the cabin. I found a small window, just low enough to peer through without being seen. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside, Alyssa sat at a large wooden table with Drew and Vanessa, the high-powered lawyer who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. They were surrounded by papers, contracts, real estate documents, and what looked like bank transfer slips. But that wasn't all. There was cash, stacks of it, piled high in neat rows across the table. They weren't just moving money. They were laundering it through fake real estate ventures. Every transaction Alyssa had been working on with Drew was part of a bigger scheme to wash dirty money through properties and shell companies. I stayed still, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. "How much are we looking at this time?" Vanessa asked, leaning back in her chair, completely at ease. Drew glanced down at the papers. "Close to $1 million, give or take. Once this is through, we're out. No more meetings. No more risks." Alyssa nodded, but she didn't look as confident as the others. I could see the strain on her face, the way she kept rubbing her hands together, like she was nervous. She was in way over her head, and now she knew it. "We can't afford any mistakes," Vanessa added, her voice cold. "The feds are already sniffing around some of our past clients. One slip up, and we all go down. Is that clear?" I felt a chill crawl down my spine. This wasn't just about stealing money or cheating the system. This was dangerous. People had gone to prison for less, and now Alyssa was mixed up in it, dragging me along for the ride whether I liked it or not. But the worst part was seeing her there with Drew. She wasn't just a pawn in his game. She was complicit, an active part of this whole operation. That realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't the woman I married. She had crossed the line, and now I had to decide whether I was going to let her pull me down with her or find a way out. I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching them, my fists clenched at my sides. Every instinct in my body told me to storm in there and demand answers, but I knew better. If I confronted her now, I'd be walking straight into a trap. There were too many moving parts, too many people involved. I had to think this through, but I was running out of patience, running out of time. That's when I decided I needed protection. I needed leverage. The next morning, I bought a gun. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't taking any chances. This wasn't just about catching Alyssa in an affair anymore. This was life or death. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I wasn't going to do it unarmed. I stashed the gun in my truck and drove home, waiting for the right moment to make my move. That night, I told Alyssa I had a last-minute delivery shift that would take me out of town. I packed a small bag, kissed her goodbye, and left. But I didn't drive far. Instead, I parked around the corner, out of sight, and waited. I didn't know exactly what I was waiting for, but something inside me told me to stay close. Hours passed. The house was dark, and there was no sign of Alyssa. I was starting to wonder if she'd gone back to the cabin, if maybe they were gearing up for their next big payout. But then, around 2 a.m., I heard a car pull up to the house. I slid out of the truck and crouched behind some bushes, watching as a familiar figure got out. Drew. He walked up to the house and unlocked the door like he'd done it 100 times before. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just business. This was personal. I waited a few minutes, long enough for him to settle inside. Then I made my move. I didn't bother with the front door. Instead, I went around the side of the house, slipping in through the basement entrance. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight, but I knew Alyssa wouldn't hear me from upstairs. She never went down here. It was my space. The gun felt heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of the choice I was about to make. I reached the top of the basement stairs and stood there for a moment, listening. I could hear faint voices coming from the master bedroom, but I couldn't make out the words. My pulse was racing, my heart hammering in my chest as I crept closer. When I pushed open the bedroom door, I wasn't ready for what I saw. Drew was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, flipping through one of my old magazines like he owned the place. And Alyssa, she stepped out of the bathroom, wearing nothing but a bathrobe, her hair wet from the shower. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in shock. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Drew jumped to his feet, the magazine slipping from his hands. "Mark, man, this isn't what it looks like." I pulled the gun from my pocket and pointed it at him before he could finish his sentence. The room went dead silent, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. "You came to my house," I growled, my hand shaking as I tightened my grip on the gun. "You came here to screw my wife and take over my life. You think I'm just going to let that slide?" Alyssa stepped forward, her hands up in a desperate plea. "Mark, please just listen." "We weren't." "Shut up," I snapped, my eyes locked on Drew. "I've seen enough. I know everything. The money, the fake deals. Vanessa, you've been lying to me for months, Alyssa. And now here you are, in my house, with him." Drew took a cautious step toward me, his hands up. "Look, man, you don't want to do this. Just put the gun down and we can talk." Before I could even process the weight of what was happening, I pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the room, louder than I expected. Drew staggered back, clutching his side as blood seeped through his shirt. He fell to the floor, groaning in pain, but he wasn't dead. "Not yet," Alyssa screamed, her voice piercing through the fog in my mind. I turned the gun toward her, my hands trembling. She backed away, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark, please don't." I fired again, the bullet hitting her in the shoulder. She collapsed to the floor, crying out in pain, blood staining the white fabric of her robe. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at them. My wife and the man she'd been sleeping with, both of them bleeding on the floor, both of them looking up at me with terror in their eyes. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, the gun still clenched in my hand. I didn't know what I was going to do next. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The sirens cut through the night ere long, before I could make sense of what I had done. I was still standing in the doorway of the bedroom, the gun heavy in my hand, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Alyssa was on the floor, clutching her shoulder, blood seeping through her robe. Drew was writhing on the carpet, his face twisted in pain, one hand pressed to the wound in his side. I didn't move. I couldn't. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching from outside myself. The only thing that pierced the fog in my mind was the sound of those approaching sirens. They were getting closer, and it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down around me. I dropped the gun on the floor. It hit the hardwood with a thud, but I barely heard it. My eyes were still fixed on Alyssa. She was looking up at me, fear and pain etched into her face. For a brief moment, I thought she might say something, plead for forgiveness, explain herself, but all she did was stare, her lips trembling. The sirens grew louder, and I knew what I had to do. I stumbled down the stairs, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I just shot my wife, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She was with another man. He's hurt too. You need to send help. The dispatcher's voice came through the line, calm but urgent, asking for details, telling me to stay where I was, but I was barely listening. The world felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. Within minutes, the house was flooded with flashing lights and the sound of boots on the ground. The officers came in with their guns drawn, yelling at me to get down on the floor. I did as I was told, my hands shaking as I lay face down, my cheek pressed against the cold tile. I heard them rush upstairs, their voices barking orders. They found Alyssa and Drew and called for the medics. I could hear her moaning in pain, and a strange, twisted part of me felt some small satisfaction in knowing she wasn't dead. But the rest of me was numb. They dragged me outside, slapped cuffs on my wrists, and shoved me into the back of the patrol car. As the door slammed shut, I watched through the window as the paramedics loaded Alyssa and Drew into ambulances. I didn't look away until they were gone. Jail was as cold and bleak as I had imagined. They booked me, took my mugshot, and threw me in a cell to wait. The hours dragged on, and I sat there, staring at the walls, my mind stuck on a loop. Over and over, I saw the scene in the bedroom. The gun, the blood, the way Alyssa looked at me like I was a stranger. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I was facing serious charges. Attempted murder, they said. Both Alyssa and Drew were alive, but just barely. The bullet had missed anything vital, but it had torn through muscle and bone, leaving them both with serious injuries. The detectives didn't seem interested in my side of the story. To them, I was just another jealous husband who had snapped and tried to kill his wife. I sat in that cell for what felt like days before I finally met my lawyer, Beth Parker. She was young, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a tired expression, like she'd seen more than her share of messy cases. When she walked in, she sat across from me, flipping through the file the state had on me. It was already thick with reports, witness statements, and hospital records. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mark, I'm going to be straight with you," she said, glancing up at me. "This doesn't look good." I nodded. "Yeah, I figured that much. They're charging you with 2 counts of attempted murder. Both Alyssa and Drew are claiming you ambushed them, that this was an unprovoked attack. They're painting you as a jealous, violent husband who couldn't handle his wife's success." I felt my stomach drop. That's not what happened. They've been lying to me for months. Alyssa, she's involved in something with Drew, something illegal. I've seen it. I've got proof. Beth raised an eyebrow. "What kind of proof?" "I've been tracking them, following Alyssa, listening to her calls. They're working with a lawyer, Vanessa Clarkson. They've been laundering money through her real estate deals." Beth's expression shifted slightly. "Vanessa Clarkson? Are you sure about that?" I nodded. "Positive. I heard them talking about it. Vanessa's the one setting everything up." Beth leaned back in her chair, considering what I'd just said. "That complicates things. Clarkson's known for representing some unsavory clients. If she's involved, this could be bigger than just an affair." "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice tight with desperation. Beth sighed. "First, we need to get ahead of their story. Alyssa and Drew are working together, and they've already spun this in their favor. They're saying you barged in and started shooting out of jealousy, but if we can prove there's more to it, we might be able to shift the narrative. We need to focus on your motivations, your suspicions about their illegal activities." "But I don't have hard evidence," I admitted. "I overheard things. I tracked them to that cabin. I saw them with the money, but I didn't record any of it." Beth tapped her pen on the table. "It's going to be tough without solid proof. But if we can create enough doubt, we might be able to argue for self-defense. We need to paint the picture that you were confronting them about their criminal dealings, not just an affair." I nodded slowly, but doubt gnawed at me. Alyssa was good at manipulating people. If she and Drew were already working together to make me look like the bad guy, I had no idea how I was going to convince a jury otherwise. Beth must have seen the look on my face because she leaned forward, her tone softening slightly. "Mark, I'm going to do everything I can to help you. But you need to understand that this is an uphill battle. They have the upper hand right now." I swallowed hard. "What about Vanessa? Can we pull her into this?" Beth's eyes narrowed. "That's a possibility. But here's the thing, Vanessa's gone. I've been checking around, and it seems like she disappeared right after the shooting. No one's seen her since. She might have skipped town to avoid getting caught up in this." I felt my pulse quicken. "She's running because she knows we can expose her." "Exactly," Beth said. "If she's involved in laundering money through these real estate deals, she's going to want to stay as far away from this as possible. The fact that she's vanished might actually help our case, but we need more than speculation. We need something concrete to tie Alyssa and Drew to those illegal activities." My mind raced as I tried to piece together everything I'd seen and heard. There had to be something I missed, something that could prove they were more than just lovers caught up in a messy affair. I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's disappearance was key to all of this. If she was out of the picture, that left Alyssa and Drew scrambling to cover their tracks. Just then, the door to the holding room opened, and Eric walked in. He looked rough, unshaven, his eyes tired, but he was still the same friend I'd known for years. He pulled up a chair next to Beth and sat down, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Mark," he said quietly, "I've been doing some digging." I glanced over at Beth, who nodded for him to continue. "Vanessa's not just hiding. She's been laundering money for a long time. Years, maybe even decades. She's tied to more than just Alyssa and Drew. There are dozens of people involved, and some of them are already under investigation. I've got a contact in the legal world who told me the feds have been looking into her dealings for months. My breath caught in my throat. So, the feds are already onto her? Yeah, Eric said. And if Alyssa and Drew are connected to her, they're not just covering up an affair. They're trying to keep the heat off themselves before the whole thing collapses. Beth leaned forward, her voice urgent. Mark, this is big. If we can prove Alyssa and Drew are tied to Vanessa's operation, it could change everything. But we need to move fast. We need to find a way to connect the dots. I nodded, my mind spinning. So, what's the plan? Beth stood up, her expression determined. I'm going to start filing motions, digging through financial records, and talking to some people I know in the legal system. If there's any trace of Alyssa's involvement with Vanessa, we'll find it. Eric placed a hand on my shoulder. Hang in there, man. We're going to figure this out. But as they left the room, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. I had fired those shots in a moment of rage, and no matter what illegal activities Alyssa and Drew were involved in, I couldn't take that back. I was already deep in this mess, and I didn't know if I'd ever make it out. The courtroom felt colder than any jail cell I'd sat in. There's something about the way everyone watches you, the lawyers, the jury, the spectators, all waiting for your life to be dissected and judged. By the time the trial started, I knew it wasn't just about what I did that night. This was about everything. Every wrong turn, every secret, every twisted lie that Alyssa and Drew had spun. But none of that mattered when the prosecution got up there and started talking about me like I was a rabid animal who had finally snapped. The prosecutor was relentless. He painted me as a jealous, controlling husband, too insecure to handle my wife's success, and so unhinged that I barged into our bedroom and shot Alyssa and Drew without thinking twice. His narrative was clean, easy to digest. Man catches wife with another man, sees red, and pulls the trigger. He hammered it home, showing pictures of Alyssa in her hospital bed, her shoulder bandaged, looking frail. He called Drew to the stand, and Drew, like the snake he is, played the victim perfectly. He told the jury how he and Alyssa had a professional relationship, and how I had misread everything. I was there to help her with a real estate deal, Drew had said, his voice steady, almost calm. Mark came in shouting, accusing us of things that weren't true. I tried to reason with him, but before I could even explain, he pulled the gun and shot us both. He paused dramatically, like he was in a bad courtroom drama, before adding, I thought I was going to die. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I listened to him twist the story. Alyssa had the nerve to sit next to him, her arm in a sling, nodding along like none of this was her fault. My lawyer, Beth, did her best to fight back. She'd done the work, digging through Alyssa's financial records, pulling strings to get a private investigator involved. They'd found evidence of the money laundering scheme, shell companies, fake real estate deals, hidden transfers. The web that Alyssa, Drew, and Vanessa had woven was complicated, but Beth laid it all out for the jury. She showed them the truth, or at least as much of the truth as she could without Vanessa there to take the fall with them. But here's the thing about trials. They don't always care about the truth, especially not when there's violence involved. No matter how much Beth revealed about Alyssa and Drew's crimes, no matter how hard she tried to show that I had been pushed to the edge, the jury couldn't get past the gunshots. They couldn't ignore the fact that I had walked into that bedroom and pulled the trigger. To them, the money laundering was just a side note, a complication in an otherwise straightforward story about a man who let his emotions take over. Beth's closing argument was powerful, though. She painted the picture of a man who had been deceived, manipulated, and backed into a corner by the very people he trusted the most. She told them that I wasn't a violent man, that I had been pushed to my breaking point by Alyssa's betrayal, by the web of lies she had spun around me. And she was right. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The jury was out for 2 days. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. I spent them in a holding cell, staring at the wall, replaying everything in my head. I kept thinking about what Beth had said, about how the system wasn't just about justice. It was about what the jury believed. I knew deep down that I wasn't innocent. I had shot Alyssa and Drew. I had wanted to hurt them, even kill them in those brief, angry moments. But I also knew that they weren't innocent either. They were criminals, manipulators, and now they were trying to pin everything on me. When the jury came back, I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. Beth sat beside me, her face calm, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She leaned over, whispering, "Whatever happens, we've done all we can. Just remember that." I nodded, but my throat was tight. I barely heard the judge call for the verdict as the jury foreman stood up. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant not guilty. I blinked, barely able to process the words. I had expected the worst, but they weren't finished. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. The weight of it hit me all at once. 5 years. That's what I was looking at. The judge handed down the sentence. 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3, plus probation after my release. The words rang in my ears, but all I could think was that I had escaped something worse. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't the end either. I had pulled a gun on 2 people and nearly killed them. The system couldn't let that slide, no matter what Alyssa and Drew had done. I turned to Beth, who gave me a small nod. "It could have been worse," she said quietly. I knew she was right. The attempted murder charge would have destroyed me. At least now, I had a shot at getting out and moving on. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that justice hadn't been served. Alyssa and Drew had walked away. After the trial, Eric was waiting for me outside the courthouse. He'd been there every day, sitting in the back of the room, watching quietly. When I saw him standing by the steps, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He was the only one who had stuck by me through all of this, and I wasn't sure why. I had dragged him into this mess, but he never wavered. "You okay?" Eric asked, clapping me on the shoulder as we walked toward the parking lot. I shrugged. As okay as I could be, I guess. 5 years. He nodded, his face grim. "Could have been worse, man. At least you're not going away for life." We walked in silence for a moment before Eric added, "I've been looking into Alyssa and Drew's business. The real estate company they were running? It's collapsing. Vanessa's disappearance shook a lot of things loose. The feds are starting to investigate, and it's only a matter of time before things catch up with them." I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. So what? They lose the business, but they still get to walk free. "For now," Eric said. "But people like that, they can only keep up the act for so long. Eventually, it all comes crashing down." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Alyssa and Drew would pay for what they'd done, not just to me, but to everyone they'd lied to, everyone they'd stolen from. But part of me knew that people like them were good at slipping away, at avoiding the consequences of their actions. And as I stood there thinking about everything that had led me to this point, I realized that I might never see true justice for what they'd done. But at least some of the truth had come to light. At least people would know that I wasn't just the crazy husband they'd tried to make me out to be. I'd been betrayed, yes, but I hadn't been broken. I took a deep breath and turned to Eric. "Thanks for sticking with me through this." He gave me a small smile. "Of course, man. We'll get through it, one way or another." And as we walked away from the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel like, even though I'd be going to prison, I was finally starting to take back control of my life. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.